Seeing the big picture from the bottom up. This is the driving theme behind Spot, the student placement online tool. This presentation was delivered on the 30th of April 2014 at the Criterion Clinical Placements Conference in Sydney. This presentation explains the issues Spot was created to address and gives some examples of the questions users can answer using Spot. In 2010, Mater Health Services completed a thorough review of their clinical placement processes. Out of that review, three major themes emerged. The first was that the placement model had to evolve. The second was the tools that were being used to manage the placements were inefficient. And the third was that the data collection process for reporting on clinical placements was onerous and it was also prone to error. When we worked on solutions to these three issues, we worked on all three together at the same time. However, during this presentation, I'll be focusing only on the tools and the data collection process. So across Mater Health Services, the tools being used for communication were phones and emails between the various stakeholders in the placement process. For planning the placement process, they used various Excel sheets, Word documents, pen and paper, wall calendars, and they sent a few emails between people as well. For the supervisors on the ward, they were using pen and paper to write down who they were looking after. They used student printouts that the students brought with them, staff rosters, and also the old emails that they sent between each other. And for recording feedback and tracking attendance, people would use student printouts again that they brought with them, university online systems if they were available, or alternatively nothing. And of course, emails. There were so many emails around. And if you've ever used emails before, you know they're probably not the most reliable tool to use for planning and organising and keeping records. So looking at the data collection process being used at Mater Health Services, if we wanted to ask a simple question like how many students are on campus today, there was a 6-step process to do that. Firstly, the clinical placement coordinator would have to review her various planning tools, so her Excel forms, emails, wall planners, to determine what students were currently on placement. Then she would call around to any areas on the campus to see if any of those students that were deemed to be on placement were actually on campus today. Then the clinical staff would check using their various supervising tools like the pens and papers, the rostering sheets, and do a head count and respond back to the clinical placement coordinator. Once she had all of that detail, the clinical placement coordinator would have to call the university contacts regarding any discrepancies between her planning tools and the reported attendance. Once all of that was done, she would collate all of the answers and put that into a reportable format to give back to whoever it was that asked the question. And after all that work and after delivering the report, the person who requested the report would normally say, "That's great, how many will be on campus tomorrow?" And it all starts again. So, to overcome these difficulties in seeing the big picture and managing placements, we scoped out a tool that could replace the myriad of different tools currently being used and that could also be used to collect and report on placement data being managed. We went to market at that time back in 2010, but we quickly found that the tool that we had scoped out did not exist. So we built Spot. The design philosophies for Spot were, and still are, that it needed to be a central information hub. So that means all clinical placement stakeholders can add to that hub and they can also access that information at any point. It needed to save time, which means it was easy to use, intuitive, and it had to replace, instead of adding to, those previously used tools like emails, pens and papers, wall chart planners. It had to be able to draw reports from the operational use of the tool. That means we didn't want to have to go out and collect additional data and enter that data to create reports. We wanted to collect all of that data from using the tool on a day-to-day basis. And it also had to be flexible and it had to fit multiple placement models. And that means not just nursing and midwifery, but all disciplines, and not just our hospitals at Mater Health Services, but all placement providers. To help explain the design of SPOT, I'm going to use two diagrams. This first diagram is of a traditional information system. Now you can see the clinical placement coordinator sits up here and is that yellow dot. Down here we've got 4 silos. We have education providers here in the blue, we have students, we have all of the clinical supervisors that the clinical placement coordinator talks to, and we have clinical managers. In a traditional information system, if the clinical placement coordinator wants information from a university, they go to the education provider silo and collect that information. If she wants it from students, she goes to that silo and collects it. If she wants to give information back to the users, she has to give it back to one of those silos as well. So if she needs to say something to the clinical supervisors, she'll send a message into that silo. One obvious issue here is that if the clinical supervisor wants to talk directly to a student, they have to go through the clinical placement coordinator in order to get that information across. Same thing if the education provider wants to talk directly to a clinical manager. They can't do that, they have to go through the clinical placement coordinator again. Hence, this is a top-down view of an information system. What we've done with SPOT is rearranged that graph to become a bottom-up information system. In this information system, all of the users are connected. Education providers are connected to their students, who are in turn connected to their clinical supervisors, who are also connected to their clinical managers, and all of that information can be shared amongst those users, and it all flows down to the clinical placement coordinator. What this means is no one is reliant on the clinical placement coordinator to distribute information nor to collect information. The clinical placement coordinator simply oversees all of the information and all of the activity and collects all of the information at the end of the day. By collecting data from operational use at the most basic level, we can compile any big picture report. So let's look at some examples of the kinds of questions we can ask and the information that we can get out of SPOT when we ask those questions. Firstly, let's ask a high-level question like how many nursing student placements did we have in the Mater Adults Hospital last month? And here's the answer. So we've got 3 education providers all giving us nursing and midwifery students. And you can see here the head counts, the number of placements, and the number of clinical hours completed. Simple enough? Okay, let's go a bit deeper then. Out of those placements, which areas in the adults hospital had the most nursing student shifts in the last month? So in other words, which area has the most students? And here's the answer. Ward 8A had the most shifts out of all of the adults areas, with 98 student shifts performed during last month. Ward 8B had the second most with 94, all the way down to some specialty areas and our stomal wound clinic, which actually only had 2 student shifts. Okay, so that's great, but how many of each year level student did each area have? Who's looking after the first year students and who's looking after the third year students? For this question, we can use the same graph, but we can split it into the year levels. So you can see here in 8A, 64 of their 98 shifts were first year students. Only 10 were second year students and 24 were third year students. You might also notice that our ED, our emergency department, didn't have any first year students because of the type of work that they do in that area. So this gives us some idea of the distribution of students. Next question. 8A looks packed then with 98 shifts. How are they going in relation to the capacity to take students in that area? Simple enough for SPOT to tell us. Here's the answer. We've got this blue line which is sitting at 9 students per day. And that's because this ward takes 4 students on an AM shift, 4 students on a PM shift, and 1 at night. And you can see these orange bars are the number of shifts worked on each day during the last month. What this is telling us is that at no point has 8A reached its full capacity of 9 students during last month. 2 days of the month they hit 8 students, and 4 days of the month they hit 7 students, but the rest they were well under capacity. We can also see here where school holidays were, as there's a sharp reduction in the number of students attending. To give you a sense of the overall capacity of the ward, we have an aggregated graph down the bottom. This says that there was 279 shifts available for students to do during the last 31 days, while only 98 have been taken up. Interesting. Okay, so are the students doing night shifts on 8A, or are they just doing AM and PM shifts during the day? Great question. Well, here's the answer. You can see again, this is the same distribution graph that we looked at on the last page, but we've split it into AM shifts with the light blue, PM shifts with the orange, and night shifts with the purple. But the only reason you know that night shifts are purple is because you can see that here on the colour legend. There's absolutely none in the graph, meaning that no student has done a night shift on 8A in the last month. There is a slight preference for AM, but it seems fairly well distributed between the two other shifts. Okay, well, let's focus on the staff now. Can you tell me which of the staff on 8A are supervising the most students and how they're going giving feedback as well? Again, no problems. Here's a list. We can see that down in the grand totals, we've got the 98 shifts. Of that, 72 of those shifts have had written feedback from a supervisor to the student. If we look up the top, we've got supervisors' names, which we've greyed out to protect the innocent. We've got the number of shifts that they've supervised on and the number of feedback forms that they've done, giving us a percentage of completed feedback forms. You can see that 2 staff have done 9 shifts with students this month. Those 2 staff have completed 6 feedback forms and 7 feedback forms respectively. So these staff are spending roughly 1 out of every 2 shifts with a student, and they're giving feedback on a regular basis. We can also see towards the bottom of the list that there's a few staff members that have only performed 1 shift with a student throughout the month, and 2 of those have not done a feedback form. So perhaps they're new, they're not confident yet to give feedback, maybe they need some help and a bit of coaching. But there is a lot of green on this chart, which means this ward is going gangbusters giving feedback. Alright, well, how about the students? How about which students were placed in 8A over the last month? Again, easy enough to find. Here's a table. During April, this ward had a 3rd year Bachelor of Nursing student from Australian Catholic University. They also had 4 first-year Diploma of Nursing students from Mater Education, 7 first-year Bachelor of Nursing students from the University of Queensland, along with a 2nd year and a 3rd year, and also an additional 2nd year student who was studying a dual degree of Bachelor of Nursing and Midwifery from UQ. So all up, 8A is accommodating 15 students from across 3 different education providers. The final example that I'll show you is the first question that we asked in this presentation. What students are on campus today? I ran this report on the day of the presentation, and this is what Spot tells me. We've got this page worth, and this page worth of students on campus today. Now you might ask, how do we know that they're on campus today? Well, the staff on the wards will actually check Spot to see who's coming. And if they haven't come, they will delete the shift and put in a reason as to why the student didn't come. So at the end of the day, I can go back and look at who was actually here. This is the plan of who's going to be here. This afternoon we can see the actuals. After all of that, this means that we can then use this wealth of data to inform decisions that affect both quantity and quality of clinical placements. If you have any questions at all or would like a demonstration of the functionality of Spot, please don't hesitate to email spot@mater.org.au. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation.